by a majority of the members present, I declare the motion passed.
The Secretary for Food and Health will move to propose resolutions under Section 34(2) of the Interpretation and General Clauses Ordinance. First motion, to amend Prevention and Control of Disease Prohibition on Gathering Amendment Number 2, Regulation 2022. And the second motion, to amend Prevention and Control of Diseases Wearing of Mask Amendment Number 3, Regulation 2022. Members may refer to the appendix to the script for the effects of and the debate and voting arrangements for the two motions. Members have been informed that this Council will proceed to a joint debate on the two motions. Upon the conclusion of the debate, this Council will put to vote the two motions one by one. The joint debate now begins. Members who wish to speak, please press the request to speak button. And I'll call upon the Secretary for Food and Health to speak on the two motions and move the first motion. Secretary. President, I move that my first motion as printed on the agenda be passed to amend Prevention and Control of Disease Prohibition on Gathering Amendment Number 2, Regulation 2022. The second motion is to amend Prevention and Control of Disease Wearing of Mask Amendment Number 3, Regulation 2022. First, I'm most grateful to members of the subcommittee under the leadership of Dr. Priscilla Leung for the valuable views they gave during the scrutiny of the regulations. We will move amendments to the two regulations in the light of members' suggestion. The government enacted the emergency regulation ordinance regulations at the outbreak of COVID-19. The purpose is to cope with the epidemic, to safeguard public health, and to alleviate the impacts on our economy and community. And therefore, the government must be able to respond swiftly to the development of the epidemic to ensure that the epidemic can be controlled, and then we will implement our policy of preventing importation of cases and the resurgence of domestic cases. And when the situation permits, we will, as appropriate, relax control measures to ensure that members of the public can be on the way to normalcy while we maintain an effective barrier to the epidemic. And the two amendments to the regulations are made with this objective in mind. Having considered views by the subcommittee, we will move further amendments to the amendments to restore the negative vetting arrangements. I'd like to take this opportunity to reiterate that the government respects the constitutional function of the legislature in making legislation and monitoring the government. As always, in making various measures to combat the pandemic, we will take into account a number of factors, including the need to protect public health, the impacts on the community, and acceptability on the part of the community. We will continue to maintain very close contact with the legislators and accept their views. Thank you. I now propose the question that the Secretary's first motion be passed. Dr. Priscilla Leung.
President, as the chairman of the subcommittee on subsidiary legislation relating to the prevention and control of disease, I would like to report on the deliberations of the subcommittee on two resolutions proposed by the administration to amend the relevant subsidiary legislation. The two resolutions seek to retain the power of the Legislative Council, LegCo, to scrutinize or amend through the negative vetting procedure the number of persons constituting a group gathering and the applicability of the reasonable excuse for a person not to wear a mask when engaging in strenuous physical activity outdoor. Members were very much concerned that when the relevant subsidiary legislation came into operation on the 21st of April 2022, the aforementioned powers of the LegCo were taken away. Members stressed that the arrangement would undermine LegCo's function to monitor the work of the government, and it was not conducive to maintaining a good relationship between the executive and the legislature. They were worried that the arrangement would become a precedent for the administration to make similar arrangement for other legislation. Members were dissatisfied that the taking away of the LegCo's power was not highlighted in the relevant LegCo brief issued by the administration. this arrangement only came to members' notice after reading the letter of the subcommittee's legal advisor. They pointed out that adjusting social distancing measures in the form of subsidiary legislation could already address the urgency of the matter, as the date from which the relevant measures would come into operation would not be affected by the negative vetting procedure. Members were of the view that the taking away of the legislative power through subsidiary legislation was unnecessary and unjustifiable. They therefore decided to move amendments to retain the power by the subcommittee. The Food and Health Bureau finally decided this Tuesday to take over the amendments to be proposed by the subcommittee. The subcommittee, therefore, has no longer the need to move these amendments, and it has withdrawn the amendments. Here, I would like to thank the Secretariat as well as the legal advisor for giving their assistance to our work. Now, I turn to my personal views. Now, during the scrutiny of the reference of legislation under Prevention and Control of Disease regulation, I must commend members for taking great care to study each clause one by one. For this subcommittee, for these two legal notices, we were not to establish a subcommittee, but then Mr. Lai Tong Kwok spotted the problem, and so he raised the matter at the House Committee. And that's why the subcommittee considered these two items. And during the scrutiny, we asked about many of the details. For example, what's considered extraneous physical activity, say, panting or sweating, and so I'm sure members will still recall the discussion. But I think what is most important is that such subsidiary legislation should be retained as legal notices, and if they are legal notices, there is no need for us to be given advance notice. That's really the bone of contention here. Already we have a negative vetting procedure. That means if someone proposes to form a subcommittee, it really doesn't stand in the way of the implementation of the measures. I think the government wanted to act more quickly, but at the end, there's now this delay. What is more important are the future implications. Now, for the legislature today and the government, they are all meant by patriots. So even for negative vetting procedure, the process is straightforward, and members, ask reasonable questions within a reasonable time frame. So even if members want to form a subcommittee, they should be given this power and room to do so. It shouldn't be as what the administration said in his reply, that is the administration members could, call press conferences, ask oral questions, or even make petition, but that is not the ideal way to deal with the matter. I must thank 10 members who signed a joint letter asking the administration to move the amendments. At the end, the administration heeded our views. I think, the government was being stubborn for no good reasons. I hope for the sake of executive and legislature relationship in the future, I hope there will be mutual trust and respect. Under Article 73 of the Basic Law, we're given the powers to monitor the work of the government in a reasonable manner, and I'm grateful to the administration for heeding our views this time. Thank you.
提出修訂附屬法例嘅擬議決議案。
Ms. Rebecca Chan, I speak in support of the proposed resolution, but I would still like to offer my views. Members of the subcommittee as well as the public would understand that this scrutiny process was not easy at all. At the subcommittee meetings, members would offer different views on the details of the measures, but those discussions were not lengthy and they did not come into conflict with the government's views. And there were controversies arising from seemingly straightforward amendments, and the administration insisted on moving amendments, and by way of issuing a notice, the relevant measures on or restrictions on group gatherings and wearing of masks would be adjusted. But at the end, the government achieved the opposite effect. And I'd like to know more about the process or the thought process that went into your consideration. Perhaps you would deem the amendments technical in nature. Under the resolutions, they have to do with the definition of group gatherings and the applicability of the wearing of masks. These are key anti-epidemic measures that would affect a lot of people. And for similar subsidiary legislation in the past, the negative vetting procedure was adopted. That is, the legislation would commence before scrutiny takes place at LegCo. The commencement date of the subsidiary legislation would take place on the same day. So the government's justifications were insufficient. Scrutiny at LegCo would not hamper the commencement of legislation. Instead, consideration would allow exchanges between the administration and LegCo, and if there are any ambiguities or issues, legislators would be obliged to suggest amendments or offer views. And the approach of the government means that the legislators' powers were taken away. I'd like to quote from the legal advisor from the subcommittee. If the resolutions are passed, the government would jeopardize the legislators' vetting powers. As LegCo members, we are also stakeholders, and in the future we will not be able to fulfill the expectations of the public to provide oversight. The administration did not proactively explain the situation to us. I used to work in the policy bureau. I was in charge of lobbying. When you saw that members were against the arrangement, the question was, why didn't the administration explain the move in detail instead of trying to get it passed in such a swift manner? It was something I did not understand. We spent a lot of time and effort scrutinizing the resolutions, so shouldn't we spend the time discussing how we can combat the epidemic? Under the improved electoral systems, there are high expectations of the government and the legislature, and legislators are obliged to scrutinize legislation, and they should speak on behalf of the public. So if similar cases arise in the future, the officials should seek to communicate with us at an early stage to alleviate our doubts and the doubts of the public. Finally, I'd like to thank the administration for making the amendment a day before the council meeting. Mr. Tony Chair. President, under the Prevention and Control of Disease ordinance, the definition of group gathering was amended from 4 to 2 or 2 to 4. These were decisions approved or endorsed by the CE in council before commencement under the negative vetting arrangement. Under such arrangement, such legislation would come into effect upon publication on Gazette, but LegCo could still scrutinize the relevant legislation, and if needed, legislators can propose amendments or to repeal certain provisions, and this would reinforce the constitutional functions of the legislature and executive. But in the recent amendments to the group gatherings and wearing of masks without any consultation, the administration, instead of using the long-standing approach of subsidiary legislation, the Secretary for Food and Health made a notice, and they amended the content of the orders on group gatherings and wearing of masks without going through LegCo. The administration said that this would allow the government to more swiftly respond to the pandemic. The fact was there was never any abuse by LegCo on the negative vetting procedure. In the past, there were delays in Hong Kong's anti-epidemic measures. They were completely unrelated to the scrutiny at LegCo. The impression was that the administration did not respect the legislature. They were even jeopardizing LegCo's powers of vetting. The government made a U-turn at the last moment to restore the negative vetting process in the past. The incident showed that the LegCo can effectively exercise its function of providing oversight to the executive. I'd like to thank the legal advisor for raising the relevant issues. And I'd like to thank Ms. Carmen Khan, the convener of G19 as well, who raised a lot of views on the proposed resolutions. And she also solicited the support of many other members. With the new term government assuming office very soon, I hope they could learn a lesson from this incident and reinforce communication with LegCo in the future. They should respect the constitutional powers and duties of LegCo members, and together we can overcome the pandemic. Mr. Lai Tong Kwa. President, I speak in support of the proposed resolutions. 2 days ago, the government made a U-turn by accepting members' views on the controversial parts of the legislation. Section 8 of Cap 599 empowers the Chief Executive in Council to make subsidiary legislation to control the importation and spread of disease, and this is governed by Section 34 of the IGCO Cap 1, and the negative vetting procedure is to be followed. The government cited reasons such as administrative efficiency and convenience in making legal notices 49 and 50. They announced that the relevant provisions were not subsidiary legislation, and they went against the basic law as well as Section 34 of Cap 1. I was reminded by Ms. Carmen Khan that I should read an important report in 2011. The government offered their views on whether the country parks consolidated amendment ordinance should be amended. The report pointed out that any regulations or other instruments that are legally binding would be considered subsidiary legislation and governed by Section 34. As to how we can judge a provision or legislation is legally binding, we must assess whether it would apply to the public or only certain individuals. And paragraph 18 of the report pointed out that from October 1999, if there was any controversy whether a provisional legislation was subsidiary legislation, it would be prescribed in the main legislation. In paragraph 5.3c, in the additional papers provided from the government to LegCo, they should clearly prescribe whether LegCo had the power to amend the relevant provisions so that an open and transparent discussion could take place. The two legal notices used to have provisions that were not subsidiary legislation, and I support the justifications offered by the subcommittee. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the government amended the provisions 8 times, and they did not express any difficulties. Amending the definition of group gathering seeks to impose control on everyone or anyone in Hong Kong. So it was by no means a simple administrative adjustment. There were wide-ranging consequences, and perpetrators could be fined. So in exercising the power to make subsidiary legislation under Section 8, citing the reasons of administrative convenience and efficiency, it was not appropriate to establish provisions on the transfer of powers of public officers.
Mr. Holden Chow. President, I speak in support of the proposed resolutions. But then the controversy arising from the proposed resolutions was about negative vetting, as other members mentioned. The administration wanted to change the approach, and now that's why there is this big controversy. First, I must thank Mr. II.Govt for raising the issue at the House Committee, so we would refer the matter to the subcommittee for scrutiny. And as the chairman of the subcommittee, Dr. Priscilla Leung, I would like to thank her too. I'm not a member of the subcommittee, but she allowed me to join the discussion. Now, what I observe is that members all saw this problem. Originally, the with negative vetting, usually we allow the administration to proceed, and then we would only scrutinize the legislation later. But this time round, the administration wanted to remove the negative vetting procedure altogether. The administration kept explaining it was because they wanted to save time and to be more efficient. But then if you save time, that is at the expense of the opportunity for the Legislative Council to scrutinize the matter. So that's why there were strong views from members. Ms. Chen Hoi-Yen, Ms. Carmen Ken, Mr. II.Govt, and so on. I could see that members insisted that, with the negative vetting procedure, we're actually allowing the administration to proceed with the measure. So how come they would not even let us scrutinize the item? At the end, of course, the administration decided to follow our views. What I want to point out is at the subcommittee meeting, there was a point raised, and I think we should all, hear about it. Members expressed worries that once we allowed it, then we would have started precedent, and then it will be the same for many more other pieces of subsidiary legislation. And so that was really the biggest concern for members. Another point I'd like to make is that the Legislative Council, conducts meeting in the open, so we scrutinize matters in the open. And for this council, we have official records of our proceedings. So discussing a matter at LegCo meetings is just for us to have a public forum for the administration and us to discuss matters, and then such discussions would go into the record. So many years later, people could still find out what happened at the time. Perhaps this is a point that the administration should bear in mind too. And that's why members, have such strong views on the matter for good reason. Of course, I must thank the administration again for, heeding members' views and going back to the negative vetting procedure. Thank you. Ms. Doreen Kong. President, the relationship between the executive and the legislature is based on honesty and communication. Now, this time the administration wanted to bypass the electrical's negative vetting procedure by government notices in changing the size of group gathering and so on. I'm glad that the administration finally listens to our views. I must thank the assistant legal advisor. On the 9th of April, the assistant legal advisor wrote to the Food and Health Bureau pointing out the issue. In the letter, the assistant legal advisor pointed out clearly that if only government notices are issued on the size of group gathering and the applicability of reasonable excuse, then how could the public, learn about these government notices? I would like to thank the legal advisor for bringing out this point, because the public usually have little understanding about government notices. The government has never done anything to let the public learn about and attach importance to government notices. So this is a so-called notice board, but it's a notice board that everybody ignores. So would it help the practice of the rule of law? The Secretary wanted to use government notices to replace the negative vetting procedure. So it's like playing a game with members for us to spot the differences. So they want to test our observation power. Now, Mr. Lai Tong Kok and Chairman of the subcommittee, Dr. Priscilla Leung, insisted on the matter, and eventually the Secretary changed her mind. So after this incident, I hope the administration will be candid and forthcoming in discussing matters with us. If they they have experienced any difficulties, I hope they will explain that to us. I hope this is just an exception. It won't happen again. Thank you. Ms. Elizabeth Quat. President, I speak in support of the proposed resolutions. In the past 2 years during the epidemic, on the prevention and control of disease, gathering ban, wearing of masks and so on, this council has considered many amendments every time it's done by way of subsidiary legislation. Of course, we know that with the prevention and control of the epidemic, we need to allow the administration to respond swiftly, so these issues are always pressing, and that's why for such amendments, they're usually done through negative vetting procedure. That means the subcommittee will only be formed after the relevant legislation has come into operation. And the legislature is actually a good forum for the administration to explain in detail the legislative intent and the rationale for the measures to the public at this public forum of LegCo. And also members will be given a chance to ask questions on behalf of the public. And then the administration could give answers. We could also pass on the views of the public, say in future if there are similar issues and there's need to, legislate, then it could be done more properly and the government could keep in touch with reality. Now, in this council, we've never tried to block the passage of bills and subsidy legislation. We've never overturned the government's subsidy legislation on major issues. Now, this time, the administration tried to secretly change the practice from negative vetting to government notices. I was quite taken aback too, and I didn't see why there's a need to do so. Many members share the same view, because we were not given any advance notice at all. It's for our legal advisor to spot the issue. And then after members studied it and saw there was a problem, then we raised it with the administration. We asked why the administration proceeded to do so. The answer was really not convincing. They said they just want to move more quickly and so on. But, this is already negative vetting. How much quicker can they move? Is it just because they want to save time? What sort of time? That is the time for discussion at this council, or the time to write papers or to go through the procedure. So they want to save such time and then they want to bypass this procedure altogether. Is that it? Of course, we can't accept such an answer. We find it unconvincing. So 10 members signed a joint letter. At 2 meetings, there were heated discussions. Now, finally, the administration restored our powers. Now, we're trying to build a new relationship between the executive and the legislature. I hope government officials would show respect to members, and there should be trust in us too. Don't think that you're just coming here to go through the motion, and as long as you have counted enough votes, it's good enough. You don't care. I don't think that's a good way to proceed. Now, after improving the electoral system, members of the public have high expectation of this council and of the government. We're going to have a new term of government, so there's even more reason to build a better relationship between the executive and the legislature. Now, this incident causes us concerns. If we allow the administration to do this time, that would they be doing the same with many other pieces of subsidiary legislation? We won't even have a chance to discuss or scrutinize matters. Now, the Environment Bureau wanted to create 7 directorate posts. They say they want to save time and effort, so they bypassed the panel, and they wanted to go directly to the establishment subcommittee to seek approval. And I think, again, we think this is a show of disrespect to the council. At the end, of course, they changed their approach. So I hope government officials will learn from these 2 incidents. You have to build a truly trusting relationship with us, and you have to show us respect, and then together we could start a new chapter for Hong Kong. Thank you.
Ms. Carmen Ken. Thank you, President. I speak to support the 2 proposed resolutions from the government. I am a member of the subcommittee to study the 2 items of subleg. I have to thank Mr. Lai Tong, our legal advisor, for pointing out the question to us, and I'm grateful to Dr. Priscilla Leung, the chairman of the subcommittee, and also members who responded to my call to a joint petition on the 2nd of June. We have worked together to this effect. Earlier this year, Mr. Xia Baolong raised 5 points to newly elected legislators. We must really be representatives of the people. We must we must be of good quality, and we must be patriots. He's of the view that the legislature and executive should complement one another. The purpose of the resolution is to resolve the amendments to the 2 items back to the negative vetting arrangement instead of publishing it by notice. Now, if the government's resolution is passed, then we can retain our vetting and amendment powers over the 2 items of subleg. I think the Food and Health Bureau has heeded our advice, and I'm grateful to this move. Now, for these 2 measures, first, that is the cap on group gathering in public, and second, whether strenuous activities in the public is an excuse for not wearing masks. Now, the social distancing measures will have a major impact on people's freedoms and ability to move around the community. Since negative vetting will not affect the timely implementation of the new measures, then I think our negative vetting power should be retained. I've checked Hansard. In 2011 and 2012, there was a subcommittee set up to study issues related to subsidiary legislation. The report gave a number of recommendations. Among them, the power to make subleg when delegated to the administration should be thoroughly considered, and the Council should consider the extent of our ability to examine the subleg. And then the government should set out details in the brief to the Council whether the Council retains its vetting power. While the executive-legislative relations is not like what it was now, the report still serves as good reference. Now, when the CEZ addressed the Council in the last Q&A session, she mentioned relations between the executive and the legislature. She said a lot of store by this, and the CE-elect, once elected, paid a visit to our president to discuss cooperation with the LegCo so that there can be good communication when new policies are launched, so that we can have good governance under the era of patriots administering Hong Kong. I hope we can open a new chapter for Hong Kong, and with these remarks I support the two resolutions. Mr. Edward Leung, I speak to support the two resolutions. I intended to speak on this, and I prepared a speech already, but then I received notice 2 days ago that there would be further amendments to the two resolutions. In fact, we could have completed our scrutiny in one meeting, but then we had two meetings instead, and we even entrusted our chairman to move an amendment to the resolutions. It is in fact just a simple matter. How come we have spent so much time on it? This is because the administration would like to amend the mode of vetting, and the further amendments to the regulations would be published by notice instead of by negative vetting of the Council, and therefore the subcommittee decided to move an amendment to restore the old arrangements. So for the fight against the epidemic, we've often always given suggestions to the administration, such as distribution of RAT kits to the elderly. The government did not consult us prior to that, and that led to grievances from the community. Had the administration consulted us first, I'm sure things would have been much better. And so I support the amendments to the resolutions, and we will try our best to supplement the government. Thank you. Mr. Dennis Leung. Thank you, President. I'm a member of the subcommittee. I'm grateful to Dr. Priscilla Leung, Chairman of the subcommittee, and also Mr. Lai Tong Kong, Ms. Carmen Ken, and Ms. Rebecca Chan, who are also members of the subcommittee. The crux of the matter is the notice would amend the subsidiary legislation. In the original notice, there is this statement: this notice is not subleg. As a result, members of the public will not be able to discharge its duties under the Basic Law. Under Article 73 of the Basic Law, we have the following. The LegCo of the Hong Kong Isle shall exercise the following powers and functions. 1. To annex, amend, or repeal laws in accordance with the provisions of the law and legal provisions. Now we are talking about Cap 55G and Cap 599I on prohibition of group gathering and wearing of masks, respectively. As Ms. Rebecca Chan said that, now if the subleg is to be amended by notice, and the notice is not subleg, then the government is contradicting itself. How come we can have an item of subleg, and then there is a provision in it to say that the notice is not subleg? This is conflicting. If the administration is going to amend subleg in this manner in the future, then legislators can no longer be the gatekeeper. We can no longer monitor the administration. In a meeting, I asked a very important question, and that is for the regulations on prohibition of group gathering, and wearing of masks. I asked who made the decision, and the response was it would be decided by the CE in consultation with a group of experts. We asked whether consent from the Executive Council was needed, but there was no reply from the administration. I'm grateful to members for their insistence to amend this part of the subleg. Our insistence has led to a last-minute response from the administration to further amend the subleg. I hope that the administration can communicate with us in the future prior to amending legislation, and please accept our recommendations so that we can maintain good relations between the executive and also the legislature. Does any member wish to speak? If not, I invite the Secretary for Food and Health to respond, and the debate shall come to a close after that. President, I thank members for their speeches and their valuable comments. We note all their views. As I said, the SL government has always respected the constitutional duty and functions of LegCo in enacting legislation and monitoring the government, and we intend to maintain good relations with the legislature. As always, the government will continue to maintain very close liaison with LegCo members and enhance communication. And we thank members for their views on various anti-epidemic measures. With these remarks, I thank members for their support. I now put this item to the vote, and that is the first motion by the Secretary be passed. Will those in favor please raise their hands? Those against, please raise their hands. I think the question is agreed by majority of the members present. I declare the motion passed. Secretary, you may move your second motion. President, I move that my second motion as printed on the agenda be passed. I propose the question to you that the Secretary's second motion be passed. And I'll put the question to you as stated. Will those in favor please raise their hands? Those against, please raise their hands. I think the question is agreed by a majority of the members present. I declare the motion passed.
議員就附屬法